And this study we're going to talk about today is the Global Business Ethics Survey, which is really the only study of its kind in our industry. It's a longitudinal cross-sectional study, if there are stats fans in the crowd. But it is meant to be a global look at the state of ethics in workplaces around the world.
Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox, and I'd like to welcome you to a special 5-part podcast series sponsored by the Ethics and Compliance Initiative, or ECI, on the 2021 Global Business Ethics Survey. In this 5-part series, I'm joined by Dr. Pat Harned, president of ECI. Since 1994, ECI has conducted the only cross-sectional study of workplace conduct from the employee's perspective. ECI's Global Business and Ethics Survey provides the only global benchmark on the state of ethics and compliance in business. This year's GBES is the first compliance-related survey conducted after the global pandemic hit. Over this series, we will review the key findings, how retaliation against whistleblowers is taking an alarming turn, the impact on COVID-19 on compliance, and we conclude with conclusions and recommendations. In this part 4, we take a look at COVID-19 and its impact on compliance. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox back again with Pat Harned for our 5th and final episode in our 5-part exploration of ECI's 2021 Global Business and Ethics Survey. First of all, Pat, welcome back.
Thanks for having me, Tom.
Pat, sort of in the first 4 episodes, we've set up a big problem or series of problems, and I hope in this episode we can give some not only conclusions, but perhaps recommendations about how the compliance practitioner and indeed the entire compliance profession can incorporate this information into their risk management programs to help alleviate and or mitigate them. So what were some of the report's conclusions?
We ended up saying in the end, having spent all this time looking at the data and all these trends, that first of all, has been a worsening in the three indicators that to us are signs of trouble ahead. So the fact that exponential numbers of people are experiencing pressure to cut corners, the fact that while misconduct has remained static, has maintained the status quo, but also add to that the fact that retaliation is skyrocketing. Those are not good signs. And if anything, they are indicators that ethics and compliance professionals, that business leaders need to be making sure that they are taking steps to address how their own organization is doing. So a lot of what we said in the conclusions, we tried to break it out based upon where organizations are in their journey in ethics and compliance. But overall, all around the world, we are seeing trends that are worrisome.
I think we have to agree that the trends are worrisome, but there are some recommendations of actual steps that a company can take. So perhaps we can explore some of those and maybe look at some broader concepts from other places as well. So what are some of the recommendations that you and ECI have come up with for this report?
Sure. As I mentioned, we tried to tailor these recommendations just based on where organizations are in thinking about the importance of ethics and compliance overall. And they're based on, first of all, a couple of key findings that we reported in the beginning of this whole research report. And that is that when you establish a high quality ethics and compliance program, there is a significant impact on the strength of the culture of the organization. And then once you establish a strong culture, there is a significant impact in good ways on outcomes like pressure, like observed misconduct, reporting retaliation. So those 2 key findings drove the way we thought about recommendations. For organizations that have not done anything to address ethics and compliance in the workplace, or have a limited ethics and compliance program, more likely to be a compliance program than an ethics one. Step 1 is to begin to implement what our industry is increasingly defining as a high quality ethics and compliance program. And there are resources available. We, of course, ECI has issued some reports over the years that help to define what it looks like to have a high quality program. But also there are some basic steps that go an awful long way, especially in an environment like the one we're in right now. Another thing that organizations can do is to identify a set of core values, if you don't have them already, and begin to integrate them into your daily conversation with employees. Help them to understand that concepts like integrity matter to you and your leadership and your workplace. Help people to understand that you want to establish respect as the norm. There are some core values you can identify and begin to integrate. And then the other recommendation we made was that, especially if you're just getting started, to develop performance goals for senior leaders, for managers, so that they visibly support and reinforce the work you're doing in establishing an ethics and compliance program. If you already have an ethics and compliance program in place, certainly it is now a time to take stock of what you've done. There are metrics available, benchmarks available to help organizations gauge the extent to which their program is maturing, the extent to which they're establishing a high quality program. But I also think that this is an important time to be reaching out to employees to determine how much pressure are they feeling, to help them be able to cope with all of the transitions that are taking place in your organization. But also, this is a time, especially if you've got the basics of a program in place, to focus on getting leadership to understand, accept, and lead an effort to strengthen the culture of your organization. If you don't have performance metrics in place around key behaviors that we expect to see among leaders who are driving a strong culture, that's an important program step to take as well.
Pat, in an earlier episode, I think it was the one on retaliation, I mentioned that the Department of Justice has now said the compliance function is the keeper of organizational justice and organizational fairness. Typically that, or usually I think that was seen in the HR function, but now the DOJ has mandated that the compliance CCO and compliance team need to be heavily involved in that. If we take that mandate from the government, how does a compliance professional, how does a CCO begin the conversation with HR, or even begin to think through how can we keep or improve our organizational justice and fairness in light of some of these findings about retaliation? Is it going down and having a virtual cup of coffee with your head of HR? Is it reviewing hotline reports? Is it looking at retaliation data? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think it's all of those, but also there are some studies that have been done. Some of them may be a little bit older, but that look at organizational justice and what are actual drivers of people's beliefs that there is organizational justice, that there is fairness in the way violations are pursued and accountability happens. One of the biggest findings from that is that the more employees understand about the reporting process, the more a company is transparent about how they undertake, obviously not sharing facts about investigations, but the more they're sharing what procedures are in place, what policies are in place, what actions are taken, there are benefits to the organization in employees' willingness to come forward and report. So one suggestion I would make is that if the ethics and compliance program and HR are dually tasked, or one is tasked and the other is not, it is important to have a conversation about how those things come together and link together. But reporting numbers, we know, depending on what your numbers are, if it's just helpline numbers, they're an insufficient picture of what's really happening and to what extent there actually is organizational justice in operations. So it's a complicated topic. I do think there are some great research studies out there. There are also just some great program guides and resources available for organizations that are looking for them.
In December of 2020, the ACFE, Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, released a report that indicated that in company surveys that fraud risks had increased and actual fraud had increased. In every time I talk to a fraud examiner, a fraud risk management professional, they tell me the number one detection technique for fraud is a whistleblower. In the fraud world, that's how more fraud is uncovered. Someone comes forward, they raise their hand. So we've got a couple of things there. We have increase in fraud, increase in pressure that you found in the 2021 survey. Pressure is one of the prongs of the fraud triangle. So it seems to me we're beginning to see several disparate trends kind of coalescing here that I tell people that fraud is me stealing from the company. Corruption is me, or bribery is me stealing from the company to fund a pot of money to pay a bribe. And that's really the only difference. So we're seeing pressure increase. And in one instance, fraud is occurring. In another instance, perhaps other misconduct is occurring. All of that wrapped around this finding around retaliation has increased as well. And I just wondered if we're beginning to see some of these changes that have occurred and that companies need to refocus a wide variety of corporate disciplines, fraud examination, internal audit, ethics and compliance, HR, around these surveyed findings.
I think so. I mean, I have to say that when you look at all of these metrics, when you put them all together, it paints a frightening picture. It's a worrisome picture, but it still remains, this data does continue to show that when an organization commits to putting into place a high quality ethics and compliance program, they do move the needles on a lot of these metrics. But I think, to your point, another trend I would add to what you were saying about pressure, about retaliation, the fact that we have seen culture strength, it's good that we haven't seen it decline, especially in this COVID environment. But it's still worrisome that only 1 in 5 people say that they work in a strong ethical culture. And so in addition to, in the fraud triangle, having the opportunity, having pressure, all of those elements, there's also an dimension of culture that allows for fraud to take place, and often fraud to take place and perpetuate and potentially even get worse. So I would say that as we begin to think about what does all this mean and what is the way forward, we are seeing signs that it is time to shore up the organizational ethics and compliance program. We're also seeing signs that while culture doesn't seem to have gotten worse yet, the amount of change that's happening every day in organizations, we should be worried that it is going to get worse. And that will be kind of the other element that I think could spell some trouble for a lot of organizations.
I know I've said this several times, but one of the most prescient phrases I heard over the last year is disaster recovery to business continuity to business as usual. If I could tie that concept to what the Department of Justice said, I think an incredibly prescient release of information last summer with the update to the evaluation of corporate compliance programs. They talked about assessing your risks when the risks change, and then using that as really the first part of a continuous cycle of information of continuous monitoring and continuous improvement. But then not stopping there, you use that information to update and improve your compliance program based upon the information you've come in. At the time, that struck me as, well, when my risks change, I need to reassess. After reading this report, I think I need to change the formulation. When I have change, there are new risks. And whether that change is we're all working from home, whether that change is we're all going back to the office, whether that change is no shot, no work. We are now in an era of, seems, as you just said, constant change. And so I'm really wondering, is one of the bigger takeaways from this is that you need to be ready to assess change.
Yes, absolutely. And we look at about 7 different kinds of change. I'm sure that there are plenty of others that we haven't even thought of to ask employees about. But there are some that even in normal times, or a lot of ethics and compliance professionals will say, a single leadership change can change your culture. It can dramatically affect the way people work, depending upon the seniority of the role, the level of impact they have. So companies should be looking at leadership change. They should be looking at downsizing. They should be looking at adjustments in work hours, adjustments in pay, any kind of merger, acquisition, relocation. And of course, we've all been relocated in the last year. We're all going to be relocated again, presumably, hopefully, in the not too distant future. Those should be considered risk areas, especially in present times for organizations. The other one I would add is pressure. To what extent are employees feeling pressure, especially, and one thing that we have seen in this research too, is that employees will tell you if they feel pressure to cut corners. They're not telling you they've actually done it. They're telling you they feel pressure to do it. And it's an excellent gauge of the extent to which misconduct is on the horizon. So I think taken together, when you're looking at risk in your organization, those are important metrics to monitor right now.
But that's, I think, a great way for us to end this series. This has been a fabulous 5-part exploration. Could you tell our listeners where they could go if they wanted any more information on the ECI or the 2021 GBES?
Sure. We would welcome anybody who wants to visit our website. Just remember the first part of our name and visit www.ethics.org.
Well, Pat, thanks so much for taking the time to visit with me, and I look forward to continuing the conversation.
Thanks again for having me, Tom.
This is Tom Fox again. I hope you've enjoyed this special 5-part podcast series featuring Pat Harned, president of ECI, on the Ethics and Compliance Initiative's 2021 Global Business Ethics Survey. I would urge you to go to the website, which I've linked to in the show notes, and download the survey. It obviously has a lot of interesting information that you can utilize in your compliance program. Also, there's more in the recommendations section around high-quality programs and how to move towards that going forward. This special 5-part series has been a special production of the Compliance Podcast Network. If you'd like to have a special podcast series, please contact me at tfox@tfoxlaw.com. Thanks again for listening, and I look forward to visiting with you again.